We entered the abandoned medical wing just after midnight, stepping into a hallway that felt colder than the night outside. The lights flickered, the beds were rusted, and every step echoed like someone else was walking behind us. The deeper we went, the longer the hallway seemed to stretch, until a broken door led us into a courtyard that looked centuries old. The buildings around us were covered in vines, their windows shattered, their walls carved with warnings we couldn't understand. Statues stood in the courtyard, tall, robed figures with cracked faces that seemed to watch us from every angle. The air felt heavy, like the whole place was holding its breath. At the center was an ancient stone well. Ivy wrapped around it like veins, and the bucket swayed even though the air was still. When Tasha leaned over the edge, she didn't see water. She saw darkness, deep, pulsing darkness. Then she heard breathing rising from below, slow and heavy, growing louder with every second. The statue seemed to lean toward the well, as if begging whatever was inside to stay asleep. We ran into the nearest building, an old observatory with a shattered dome and a clock tower stuck at las Dias, but the clock wasn't frozen. It was ticking backward. Each tick made the shadows move, stretching across the floor like they were alive. A stone slab inside spoke of a keeper beneath the courtyard, something ancient that woke when time reversed. We followed a narrow path to an alley lined with gargoyle statues. Their eyes seemed to glow in the moonlight as we approached the iron gates at the end. A sign above them warned, "Beyond these gates lies nothing but their grasp." Gates opened on their own, revealing a forest of black trees and absolute silence. We stepped through, and the forest swallowed us. The path vanished. The gates disappeared. Something moved between the trees, a shape with no face, but too many hands. It whispered without a mouth and followed without footsteps. Only one of us made it back to the courtyard, shaking and bleeding. She whispered, "They're not statues, they're watchers. They keep the forest from spreading." Then the well stopped breathing. The clock ticked forward, and the gates began to open again. When the gates began to open again, the air in the courtyard shifted. It felt heavier, almost pressing against our skin. The well behind us let out a faint groan, like something deep inside was turning over. The statues around the courtyard seemed different now. Their heads were tilted, their hands raised slightly, as if they were bracing for whatever was coming through those gates. The last survivor tried to stand, but her legs shook too hard. She kept whispering the same thing over and over. They weren't supposed to wake up. The watchers weren't supposed to move. Her voice cracked as she pointed toward the alley. The gargoyles at the entrance were no longer still. Their wings twitched, their claws scraped the stone. Their eyes glowed brighter than before, like embers waiting for air. The forest beyond the gates pulsed with a dim light, almost like a heartbeat. Shadows moved between the trees, shifting in ways that didn't match any human shape. Something stepped forward, slow and deliberate, stopping just beyond the threshold. It didn't cross into the courtyard. It didn't need to. Its presence alone made the ground tremble. The backward-ticking clock in the observatory suddenly stopped. Then it ticked forward once. Just once. That single tick echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. The survivor screamed, covering her ears, begging us not to look at the forest, but we couldn't help it. The trees were bending, leaning toward us, as if listening. A voice rose from the well, deep and broken, speaking a language none of us recognized. The statues responded, shifting again, their stone bodies grinding loudly. They weren't guarding the courtyard anymore. They were preparing for something larger. Something older, something that had waited beneath the well for decades. The gates opened fully, and the forest exhaled. A cold wind rushed through the alley, blowing dust and leaves across the courtyard. The survivor whispered one last warning before her voice faded completely. If the forest crosses the gates, the whole place becomes theirs. Then the wind stopped. The forest went silent, and something stepped through the gates. The thing that stepped through the gates didn't move like anything alive. It slid forward, its shape bending with the shadows, its limbs shifting in ways that made our eyes ache. The air around it rippled, like heat rising off pavement, except the temperature dropped with every step it took. The courtyard felt smaller, tighter, as if the buildings were leaning inward to watch. The survivor tried to crawl away, but the creature didn't even look at her. It lifted its head, if that twisted shape could be called a head, and focused on the well. The statues surrounding it trembled, stone grinding against stone, their arms raising higher as if trying to hold something back. The creature paused, listening, and the forest behind it pulsed again, a deep throb that made the ground vibrate. Then the well answered. A low rumble rose from its depths, shaking dust from the courtyard walls. The bucket hanging over the opening swung violently, slamming against the stone. The creature stepped closer, and the rumble grew louder, turning into a roar that didn't sound like any animal. It sounded ancient, angry, awake. The backward ticking clock in the observatory suddenly spun forward, its hands whipping around the face until it landed on a new time, midnight. The moment it stopped, every statue in the courtyard snapped its head toward the gates. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, like embers catching fire. The creature froze. For the first time, it looked afraid. The statues moved, stepping off their pedestals with heavy thuds that echoed across the courtyard. Their stone robes dragged across the ground, leaving trails of dust. They formed a circle around the well, their arms raised, their faces aimed at the creature. The air crackled, thick with something old and powerful. The creature backed away, its limbs twisting, its body flickering like a dying flame. The forest behind it screamed, a sound that tore through the trees and rattled the gates. The creature lunged forward, desperate to escape back into the darkness, but the gates slammed shut with a force that shook the entire courtyard. The statues lowered their arms. The well went silent, and the creature was trapped on our side. It turned toward us slowly, its body reshaping itself into something new, something sharper, something hungry. The survivor whispered one final warning before collapsing completely. If it can't go back, it will feed here. The creature took its first step toward us. The creature stepped toward us, its body twisting into shapes that didn't belong in our world. Every movement made the courtyard feel smaller, like the air itself was shrinking away from it. The statues didn't move anymore. They stood frozen, their purpose finished, their ancient duty complete. Whatever they had been guarding was no longer contained. The creature paused, tilting its head toward the well. A faint glow rose from the darkness inside it, soft at first, then brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. The ground trembled. Dust fell from the broken windows. The survivor whispered that the keeper was waking, the thing the watchers had been holding down for decades. The creature backed away from the well, its limbs shaking, its form flickering like a dying flame. It wasn't hunting us anymore. It was afraid of what was rising. A deep rumble rolled through the courtyard, louder than thunder, shaking the buildings around us. The well cracked down the middle, splitting open as a massive shadow rose from inside. It didn't have a shape. It didn't need one. It was darkness, given weight. A presence older than the forest, older than the observatory, older than the watchers themselves. The creature screamed, a sound that tore through the courtyard, and tried to flee toward the gates. But the gates didn't open. The forest didn't call it back. It was trapped. The shadow from the well reached out, stretching across the courtyard like a tide of night. The creature tried to run, but the darkness swallowed it whole, pulling it into the cracked stone. Its scream faded, echoing once, then disappearing completely. The rumbling stopped. The glow faded. The well sealed itself, the crack closing as if it had never been broken. The courtyard went silent. The statues returned to stillness. The forest behind the gates stopped moving, and the clock in the observatory ticked forward one final time. Midnight. The survivor looked at us with empty eyes. "It wasn't trying to escape," she whispered. "It was trying to warn us." The wind returned, blowing through the courtyard for the first time since we arrived. The gates creaked open, just an inch, not enough for anything to pass through, but enough to let the forest breathe. A cold whisper drifted out, brushing against our ears like a final message. "Not yet." Then everything went still. The courtyard, the forest, the well, the watchers, all silent. all waiting, and we finally understood the truth. The creature wasn't the threat, it was the first warning. The real danger is whatever the Watchers were built to hold back. And now that it has awakened, the gates will open again.